full speed ahead on our restoration efforts here in the Gulf Coast region. I'm thrilled to be back in my hometown. I will admit, come in a day early, under the radar, and just having a little bit of Mardi Gras. It was necessary and restorative in all the ways that our hometowns can be. So it's great to be here. We're going to hear from many of the people here on the dais, but what you see before you are the members of the Gulf Coast Ecosystem Restoration Task Force, and you'll note that we have representatives from the 5 states that make up this great region, as well as what I called this morning on the news an alphabet soup of federal agencies. But please understand, from the White House to the Department of Justice to the resource agencies like NOAA and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Department of Interior, Agriculture, Transportation, here to focus the efforts of governments on restoring the Gulf Coast, its ecosystem, and its habitat, its people. We also have, I know, a number of elected officials in the audience. I saw Parish President Farce, Parish President Charlotte Randolph. I know I saw them come in. Welcome and greetings, and if there are others in the audience, welcome and greetings to you as well. I see conservation groups, environmental justice advocates. I see people who care about the industries of this region, and I see environmentalists as well. So welcome everyone. This is a day that many have hoped for and worked quite significantly towards. This task force is your task force, and I hope that when you leave today, you will understand 2 things. One, quite well, what this task force is about, how we intend to do our work. We have a very ambitious agenda. We have a final report due in October, but final reports mean public input has been taken not only generically but on draft reports. And so you'll see that this morning in our presentations. But we also want to make sure that especially stakeholders understand the process for stakeholder input. Remember, the President's executive order that established the task force you see before you said that this should be from the ground up, from the region, not from officials, especially federal officials, but any of us telling the region what the strategy would be for restoring the coast. The ultimate purpose of this meeting, then, is twofold. I want to remind everyone this is a meeting of the task force. This group doesn't get together in person very often. We do meet by telephone and teleconference. We have chosen to have the entire meeting open to the public. You can see our deliberations, but much of the morning until about 1 o'clock will be the deliberations of this task force itself. At 1 o'clock we'll begin the stakeholder input process. And we'll go into the evening because we realize that many stakeholders are at work or will be able to join us later in the day. I just wanted to be clear on that because you may feel like this group is talking to itself a lot, but we wanted to conduct our business in an open and transparent manner, and we welcome you. We'll be having meetings like this throughout this region. This is an all-hands-on-deck effort. Anyone and everyone who has an interest and cares about this task force, that's what this task force is meant to facilitate. You've all heard me talk a long time that this region is long overdue for the kind of federal and national attention that the federal government can bring, and that the combined resources of federal, state, local government, and the public can mean in aligning resources and getting things done. So with that, I just thought we would start for just a minute and remember what it is that we're here for. We'll hear from, by the way, our newly designated Vice Chair, Mr. Garrett Graves, who is Chair of the Coastal Protection and Resource Authority of Louisiana, in just a minute, but I want to take just a second to welcome him to the Vice Chairmanship. All right, the Gulf of Mexico, one of America's greatest and most diverse treasures. We all know it's home to some of the most extraordinary habitats and wildlife, wetlands, migratory birds, deep sea and shallow water aquatic life. And we also know that those many natural resources are under threat and have been since well before the BP spill. The area holds 30% of the nation's coastal marsh, about 3 million acres. Those 3 million acres are critical habitat for millions of birds. Louisiana's wetlands alone provide wintering ground for 70% 60% of the nation's migratory water crop. We also have here about 90% of the continental U.S. coastal marsh loss. Yet every 38 minutes, a football field-sized parcel of land turns to open water. This land makes our communities, infrastructure, our ports, our other resources vulnerable, and this destruction is further unbalancing our ecosystem, taking away critical nurseries and habitats. Louisiana has lost an average of 34 miles of land per year for the last half-century. The region is also averaging estuarine emergent loss of more than 5,500 acres a year. Now, at the same time, we are losing the necessary resources to filter pollution and maintain the balance of the ecosystem. We are seeing rapid increases in nutrient pollution. In the past half-century, nutrient buildups along the coast have led to increased dissolved oxygen levels, also dangerous to marine life. The area in the northern Gulf of Mexico, the Louisiana and Texas continental shelf, is the largest hypoxic zone, the largest dead zone in the United States, and the second largest for the world's coastal ocean. We thought meeting here in Louisiana, we would start by focusing on the Louisiana challenges, because we will have meetings in each of the other states. So you'll see a presentation now on at least a little bit of what we're facing here along the Louisiana Gulf Coast and in this area. All of our resources are essential to the millions of people who live in this state and in the area. The Gulf Coast is an extraordinary uniter of 5 states that share a single coastline, and a constant reminder that what happens in one part of the Gulf often affects every other part of the Gulf. In the years ahead, the population here is projected to continue to grow. The coastal population of the 5 states of the Gulf of Mexico is projected by the Census Bureau to increase by nearly 40% between now and 2025. The natural beauty here also explains why every year millions more people come to visit the Gulf Coast. They come to vacation, to sail, to swim, to fish, and to enjoy these great waters. In 2008, national and international tourists spent about $145 billion in the 5 coastal states. That economic activity and travel and tourism employed about 1.7 million people. And of course, tourism is just one of the many incredible economic drivers provided by these waters. The waters produce 1.3 billion pounds of commercial fish and shellfish annually. There is a $367 million at dockside from shrimp, 73% of total U.S. shrimp production. $60 million in oysters, or 59% of the U.S. total production. The region is also home to a $29 billion per year agriculture industry. There is also $124 billion from oil and gas exploration and recovery, which provides another 55,000 jobs. And 7 of the top 10 busiest ports in our country are along the Gulf Coast. 65% of the nation's maritime trade passes through these Gulf ports. In fact, if you added up the output from Gulf trading, it would make up the 6th largest economy in the world. As has been so correctly noted so often, this is a working coast. It's a working coast that's critical to the nation. When the Gulf was thriving, the economies of the 5 Gulf states supported more than 19 million jobs and nearly $2.5 trillion of the U.S. GDP. That was in 2008. 36% of the region's employment is in coastal communities, with an even greater percentage in some states like Louisiana, where 80% of the jobs are reported along the coast. What these numbers really represent is a way of life and a culture that depends on a healthy, vibrant, and economically strong Gulf community. Someone said yesterday at our pre-meeting that when you think about every one of those industries, they're not just done in conjunction with the natural resources, they depend on the natural resources for their very survival. We've seen in recent years what happens to the way of life here when it's threatened. The hurricanes of 2005 and 2006 showed how our coastal communities are vulnerable, and we need to help them become more resilient. During the BP spill, we essentially lost the Gulf for a period of several weeks. We lost the use of valuable fishing grounds and almost had to do without shrimp and oysters. We lost months of tourism dollars that your communities count on, and we lost the intangible things, the benefits of having a thriving, vibrant ecosystem as part of our community. From that, we learned just how difficult and costly it was to do without those things, even for a short while. At a small price compared to what would happen if we lose them. Good. The needs of the people, the environment, the economy are linked. A system in balance will support the people and the communities and the environment and the economy. Multiple lines of defense are needed against flooding and land loss, hurricanes, and climate change. The task force, the people you see before us and all of you, are an opportunity to restore this ecosystem and reap all the benefits that come with it. It's an opportunity for us to work together, to join together, to harness the work, the thinking, and studying that has been done to address these challenges. In recognition of all that's happened, but more importantly, all that's left yet undone, the President has charged this task force with federal and state officials to begin a transition from coastal response to coastal recovery. The Gulf Coast Ecosystem Restoration Task Force will start now to align the efforts that address the long decline of our coast. State and local governments, the private sector, tribes, our scientists, our citizens have great plans. We want and need to shape these plans into a comprehensive and coordinated force. On a personal note, I'm grateful to the President and the people of the Gulf for the chance to serve the region I call home. This opportunity is something very special for me, combining my life's passion, a healthy and clean environment for our children and our grandchildren, with the opportunity to give something back to this region that nurtured me. As someone who grew up here, I know that the challenges facing this ecosystem go back much further than the BP spill. We are here to respond to that single devastating event. However, a full restoration simply will not be possible unless we address the environmental problems that have plagued this region for so long. The President is committed to rebuilding the region. He has heard you. He stands with you, as do I, as do all of the other folks who have been blessed enough to call this region home. If you look around, you can see the many, many people beside you who are dedicated to this effort. We all have a part in it. This is what we did last night. Together we can be successful. Our sum is much greater than our parts, and this task force is here to help integrate those parts into a whole collaborative effort. I look forward to meeting with you, and I thank each of you very, very much. We are now going to turn it over to Gavin for a couple of opening remarks. Oh, wait.
Say hi on that. Very briefly, Charles, we know you're coming back up right away.
Thank you so much, Administrator Jackson, Garrett Graves, John Hankinson, and all the members of this task force, and all of you all who are here. On behalf of Mayor Landrieu and our administration, I welcome you to New Orleans at this very important and critical time. As we know, there are a lot of our people from our respective and affected communities who are really banking on this process to produce some very substantive outcomes, and I know we won't shy away from that. I really appreciate, and I know others of you feel this way too, that this process calls for a very actionable strategy to be developed. A strategy that takes into account all the many planning processes and projects that we have developed and inventoried and studied for so long. You've got a whole wealth of resources and administrators and agencies, locally, statewide, and of course federal, to bring all of that good knowledge together. So again, let's not shy away from that. Finally, on a more personal note, I think this always helps us in remembering what's really important. Let's remember, as we're just less than 2 months away from the 1-year anniversary of this disaster, the 11 lives that were lost on that Deepwater Horizon rig, and the many lives that are lost every day still from depression and the numerous other life-depriving situations that are outcomes of the disaster, as we know. It's all about the people, and I appreciate you, Administrator Jackson, always reminding us of that. It's always about the people. And so again, I thank you, I welcome you, and also while you're here, enjoy yourself. Enjoy yourself as long as you can. Spend your money here. And take back with you, of course, that very strong, deep, and abiding love that our people have for community and family. And that continues to separate us and keep us apart, and stand us apart, I should say, from the many other communities. And it keeps people coming back to our city. So thank you.
We're now going to hear from Gary.
Thank you, Administrator, and Charles, thank you for the welcome. I just want to briefly say thank you to the President for establishing the task force. I want to thank Administrator Jackson for the amazing time commitment that she's made to this task force, and looking around this table, seeing the senior leadership from the White House, from the federal agencies. This is an amazing accumulation of knowledge, of expertise, and quite frankly, of authority. What's been going on on the Gulf Coast and the coast of Louisiana has been a crisis for several years now. And I think the President took the initiative, and now it's up to us to make something happen, to develop a future for Louisiana, a future for the Gulf Coast that's more sustainable, that's a resilient coast that will allow our communities to thrive. As the host state in this case, they gave the state of Louisiana an opportunity to present, so I'm going to hold the rest of my comments and try and save a little time here until we do that presentation. But I just want to thank all the states and the federal agencies for being here today to participate in the task force.
Excuse me. Good morning. I'm John Hankinson. Charles, I guess that explains why I was walking down the street and somebody threw this at me yesterday. So I figured if they were nice enough to throw it at me, I'd have to wear it. But something's going on here, and I'm going to find out what it is before I'm done. I think Madam Administrator might explain that to me before I leave. But anyway, it's a tremendous time to be here. Thank you for welcoming us to the city, and my welcome to all the task force members and all the folks who've come to join us here today. I'm very excited about this session. It's also nice to look around the room and see people I know now who I didn't know 3 months ago, because I have been here on a number of occasions and hope to be back a lot and meet even more folks here. We know that, as the Administrator pointed out in her opening, we're dealing with the full range of issues for the ecosystem of the Gulf of Mexico. In fact, many of these issues have been around for decades, and they're issues that need to be addressed. And in terms of sustainable storm barriers, the nutrient pollution, the loss of wetlands, and now added to it the impacts of the oil spill. So we are looking at a broader restoration, but we also know there's still significant issues that people have in relationship to the most recent impacts of the oil spill, and we will try to be as sensitive as we can to help address that. In that role, I just wanted to mention that we're very pleased that Stacy Elmer, Stacy, if you stand up, from Health and Human Services has joined us today. She will be available. She has a table out on the back of the room out in the hall there to talk about specific health issues if folks want to talk about that. We're also hoping to get, if there are questions in terms of economic issues, we can try to field the questions. We don't have the answers because that's not our role, but we want to make sure we're as responsive as we can as state and federal folks who are working on the task force on behalf of all the citizens here. As the Administrator mentioned, the main focus today will be on the development of a strategy that the President charged this task force to complete by October 4th. That strategy has to come from the bottom up, and this process is designed to allow that to happen, to bring in the citizens of the Gulf, combine it with the best science and the hopes and aspirations of local governments, of citizens, of communities, of the states and federal agencies who are concerned with resources in the deep Gulf, and come up with a strategy for really implementing some action. Folks who are not interested in a new plan, they're interested in some action in the Gulf. And that's what the President charged us with, is develop a strategy that would drive action. So we're going to kick that off today. We want to make sure everybody understands what we propose. It's going to be very aggressive, and we look forward to getting everyone involved. We intend to be in all the states, not just Louisiana. We're in Florida, my home state, and hopefully we'll go back to Florida sometime. I think that's a pretty cool place. They don't throw stuff at you from the street, but they do have some other traditions that I like. I'll get into later. But anyway, we want to move forward to talk about the stakeholder engagement process, and our staff will do that. And we'll have some special presentations of interest, we thought, to the community and to the task force on seafood safety and the status of the still cleanup. And then finally, as the administrator mentioned, we will have our session after lunch for public input. So we have a full day ahead of us, and we very much appreciate everyone coming. But as the administrator mentioned, this part is the task force sort of working amongst itself up here, and then we'll have a period after lunch for questions and input from the public, and then we'll go into the evening trying to get the stakeholder process started. So with that, I turn it back to you now, Administrator.
Thank you, John. John's a wonderful executive director, and it's great to have somebody who knows this region as well. Brian Griffith, stand up. Brian is now being knighted. Your job today, sir, in addition to a lot of hard work, is to also keep us on time. So he has a very nice smile, but don't mess with John. Task force members. And before we turn over to my Vice Chair, Garrett Graves, I'd like to start at the far end of the table down there. It looks like Bruce Gelber. Can you just give your name and your agency, please?
Well, my name is Bruce Gelber. I'm the representative from the U.S. Department of Justice.
Nancy Sutley, I'm Chair of the White House Council on Environmental Quality.
Carlos Mohe, Domestic Policy Council. I'm Rob Salt, Department of the Army, Civil Works.
Mimi Drew, Florida Department of Environmental Protection.
Steve Stock, Director, Civil Works, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers.
Helen Young, Texas General Land Office.
Gunner Guy, State of Alabama Conservation Department.
Will Shaprath, U.S. Department of the Interior.
Alice Perry, the Mississippi Department of Environmental Quality.
Good morning, Larry Robinson, Department of Commerce, NOAA.
Harris Sherman, USDA.
Sally Erickson, White House Office of Management and Budget.
Byron Black, Department of Transportation.
Sherry Abbott, White House Office of Science and Technology Policy.
Hi, I'm John Barry. I'm here, I guess it's part of the CPRA. I'm also on the Southeast Louisiana Flood Protection Authority East, which is oversees several levee districts in the New Orleans metropolitan area. I want to thank you for the opportunity to present, and I want to give you my condolences for the task ahead of you. In a sense, I've often said that the politics of solving this problem are at least as complicated, probably more complicated than the science and engineering going into the problem, and you are addressing the politics of this. I'd like to step back from the spill and give you a somewhat broader perspective on the situation of the Gulf. The map that you see up there is the Mississippi River. When I think of the river, that is what I think of. I do not think of anything that comes in a straight line from Minnesota south. And the river is absolutely key to the entire Gulf, and particularly to the Louisiana part of the Gulf. As you all know, Louisiana has lost more than 2,000 square miles of coastal land. That's more than the state of Delaware. If you put Delaware between New Orleans and the ocean, New Orleans wouldn't need any levees. So that land loss is, really enormous in terms of the vulnerability not only of New Orleans to hurricanes, but the whole rest of the state. It's completely changed the equation. We're much worse off than we were 50 to 60 years ago. I want to cover 3 points. First, how we got here, then what can be accomplished, and then what happens if we fail. Our present circumstances are a combination of geology and too narrow a view of decisions that were made and which had unintended consequences. And to understand the problem, you need to first understand that the Gulf of Mexico once went up to Cape Girardeau, Missouri, which is more than 600 miles in a straight line from the present model. All the land from Cape Girardeau south was made by the deposit of sediment from the Mississippi River. That's 35,000 square miles of land. Then, coming out of the mouth of the river, coastal currents carried sediment east and west, mostly to the west, and created more square miles. In total, about 40,000 square miles of land was created by the deposit of sediment from the Mississippi River. About 8,000 square miles of that is on the coast. Now, engineering has reversed this natural land building process and transformed the land making into land loss. Virtually all of this engineering benefits the entire nation. Virtually all the costs have been imposed upon the Gulf Coast, and particularly on Louisiana. First, I'll give you several elements of this equation. First, the Mississippi River now carries considerably less than half of its historic sediment load. Some scientists think it's as little as 30%, and the trend is still actually going down. It used to carry 400 million tons a year, would pour out of the mouth of the river and replenish land and be carried by coastal currents east and west. Now it carries between 125 million and 140 million tons a year. That decline is a major factor in land loss. And it's occurred because of literally tens of thousands, engineering interventions, some of them 1,500 miles away from the Gulf Coast. And more than half of those tens of thousands of interventions, more than half of the total sediment loss comes from 6 dams built in Montana, North Dakota, and South Dakota that were constructed. They were finished in 1963. They were built for hydroelectric power, irrigation, and flood protection in the high plains. According to the Corps of Engineers, upon the completion of those dams, the sediment coming out of that area into the river dropped from 175 million tons to 25 million tons, a loss of 150 million tons of sediment. So those 6 dams, more than 1,000 miles and up to 1,500 miles from the mouth of the river, account for more sediment loss than the entire rest of the Mississippi River system delivers to the Gulf of Mexico. And they provided tremendous benefits to people from St. Louis to the Rockies, and they produced tremendous damage to the people on the Gulf Coast and increased the danger down here. Now, at least half the sediment that continues to be in the river is wasted because it goes out jetties. Jetties were built to cut through sandbars that block shipping lanes, and these jetties deposit the remaining sediment more than 2 miles out into the Gulf, into deep water, where they're no longer available to replenish the land. Those benefits have been enormous from those jetties. I'll give you an example. In 1875, the year the jetties first started construction from St. Louis, going out through the mouth of the Mississippi River, there were 6,500 tons of shipping. In 1879, the year they were finished, that tonnage increased to 456,000 tons, from 6,500 to 456,000 from one city. So the entire Mississippi River basin, the whole navigable system, benefited similarly. This enormous increase, but once again, benefits national, all the costs local. Another cause, levees. They prevent river flooding in Louisiana and Mississippi. They certainly interfere with the replenishment of the land locally as well. But if you look at where the levees, where the land loss is most extreme, and it's associated with levees, those levees are not there to protect populations. Nobody lives there. They're there to protect the shipping channel along the lower river. So once again, that's a national benefit. Benefits to the shipping industry in other areas. The Gulf Intracoastal Waterway was built for national security to protect shipping from German submarines before World War II. And that has been a huge cause of saltwater intrusion and land loss. The Mississippi River Gulf Outlet has gotten a lot of attention. But the GIWW has actually caused more land loss than Mr. Go. And I should note that right now the state of Louisiana and the federal government are in some dispute over who should pay for repairing the damage of Mr. Go, a navigation channel. And another cause is oil and gas production. Louisiana is by far the country's largest producer of offshore oil and gas and all domestic oil and gas. The industry has dredged approximately 10,000 miles of canals through the marsh. This accounts directly, just for the dredging of the canals themselves, for more than 10% of all the land loss, just the area of those canals. And in addition, there's the indirect causes from saltwater intrusion, which is significantly greater than the direct cause. According to USGS, the oil and gas industry is responsible for 36.06% of the total land loss. Once again, Louisiana has benefited from this industry, obviously, but most of the benefits are national. And the canals and pipelines from the oil industry have enormously accelerated what was a slow degradation and was transforming a long-term problem into an immediate crisis. A good analogy is that the decline of the sediment in the river and the jetties and the other engineered factors that benefit shipping and the levees created a situation akin to taking a big block of ice out of the freezer so it begins to melt. But the canals dredged by the oil industry is more like taking an ice pick and chipping away at that ice, and it just greatly accelerates the problem. So everything I just said is an undisputed fact. It's not controversial. And there's no other possible conclusion but that the benefits accruing to the entire nation have dramatically increased the danger to the Gulf Coast. Now, what can be accomplished? The bulk of the land loss cannot be rebuilt. It's impossible because the river very simply does not carry enough sediment to do the job. And however, the scientific community does support the proposition that if the right decisions are made, we can achieve no net loss of more coastal land, and we can rebuild land in strategic places to protect densely populated regions, and we can do it in a sustainable way. And we have a chance to succeed even with rising sea level. The delta of the Mississippi River is a dynamic, living system. It is alive. Like everything living, it fights for life. So if it's supplied with sediment and fresh water, it can adjust to and rise with sea level. It's a slow process, and if it's got sediment and fresh water, those plants will rise with sea level. Now, what happens if we fail? Louisiana, as Administrator Jackson has already referred to, the importance of the port complex, not only in Louisiana, but in the entire Gulf Coast. Louisiana, of course, is, as these slides say, I hate PowerPoints where people just run down what the slides do say, but, 5 of the top 15 tonnage ports in the country, including the number 1. It's the largest cargo complex in the world. This is a visualization of just what that looks like. This is by tonnage. It's really an amazingly important system for the country. There's simply no substitute for Louisiana's port system. Tulsa is a port that supports roughly 10,000 jobs because of the Mississippi River. Pittsburgh is a port. Hunting in West Virginia is the 8th largest port in the United States. It's bigger than Baltimore, Philadelphia, Tampa, and so on because of the river system. These are truck flows of freight from the port of New York, and here we've got Los Angeles. There's the Louisiana Gulf Coast. So you can just look at the comparison of these truck flows and get a sense of just how important the system is down here. Seafood. You know, the life cycle of over 90% of all the fish and 98% of all commercial species caught in the Gulf of Mexico depend on Louisiana marshes. By weight, 24% of all commercial species caught in the lower 48 are in Louisiana waters. The energy, you know, top producer domestic oil, top producer of offshore oil, offshore energy, alternative energy for potential is enormous. You know, the continued erosion of the Louisiana coast threatens all of that. All of it. And none of it, all that potential and real current economic benefits to the United States, all of that are threatened by the continued erosion of the coast. None of it is sustainable if a long-term solution is not found. The national economy and national security depends on protecting and preserving the economic infrastructure currently in place. What is at stake? Very simply, is the well-being of the entire nation. I want to close actually with a poem. Probably everyone in this audience is familiar with the line, "No man is an Ireland." Some of the audience may know that it's from John Donne in the 17th century. I want to read you the actual context in which that line appears. "No man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the many. If a clod be washed away by the sea, Europe is blessed, as well as if a promontory were, as well as if a man or of thy friends or of thine own were. Any man's death diminishes me, because I am involved in mankind, and therefore never send to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee." And that is precisely where we are today, 400 years after John Donne wrote those lines. And I thank you very much, and good luck.
Thank you, John, and others. Again, I want to try to put a face on this situation. As you know, I speak from this perspective here, the Coastal Zone Administrator for Orleans Parish. But I want to point out, again, the connectedness of all of us, the connectedness of Orleans, to St. Bernard, to Plaquemine, to Jefferson, and all the others. This here, of course, is a map showing you New Orleans, and just how we're all part of this whole ecosystem, and how also, as we have all come to realize post-Katrina and Rita and BP disaster, that New Orleans truly has always been, and even more so now, is a coastal city, a coastal community. So goes the coastal rim of our state, so goes New Orleans. So goes Plaquemine, St. Bernard, Jefferson, and the others, so goes New Orleans. But I want to point out, remember we talked about how this actionable strategy can not only address what happens along the rim, the area where there was direct oiling last year, but also the plan and strategy needs to address a whole host of efforts that we've been talking about for so long to address wetland and coastal restoration. The area in particular here, the Lake Bourne ecosystem, you see the Lake Pontchartrain, but the Lake Bourne ecosystem there in particular, that little red square there, That's my immediate neighborhood, the lower ninth ward here in New Orleans. And our, you might say our backyard or back door, eventually leading into St. Bernard Parish, that's the Bayou Bienvenue Central Wetland Area, all tied to the Lake Borgne ecosystem. Now, again, no direct oiling in that area, but again, the strategy can also address restoration of this area that's also inextricably tied to what happens along the coastal rim. That's our backyard, our back door, like I pointed out. Eventually, as you get into Lake Borgne, you can eventually maneuver out and you're in the Gulf of Mexico, basically. That's a closer shot of it. That whole area, of course, after 40 plus years of the Mississippi River Gulf outlet and GIWW being open, was killed off due to saltwater intrusion. So it used to be studied with a lot of cypress trees, wetland grasses, and provided a plethora, before that time, of ecosystem services and benefits to our community. That there is the Bayou Triangle just on the northern end of Lower Nile. That area used to be studied with wildlife and vegetation. Again, killed off. Those are some of the tree stumps that you can find in the Bayou and Central Wetland area. Back again to people and the population shifts. This information, recent census data provided to us by way of the Greater New Orleans Community Center database, shows the population drops, of course, since 2000, and we know tied also to Katrina and Rita disasters. For instance, look at the drops in Orleans Parish, St. Bernard in particular. We've got a very tenuous situation here. And so like Garrett and others have pointed out, any kind of sustainable restoration plan, an actual strategy, can also help in bumping up our population numbers. It's a very tenuous situation here. As people can come to see with time that actual work is taking place to rebuild our coast, restore our environment, these numbers could go back up again. This is very important, folks. Again, just some of the faces of our people of Orleans, St. Bernard, and Jefferson, who work every day. Their lives are inextricably tied to what goes on in the environment. Again, our environment is our way of life. There's no way of separating the two. And as we've talked about, it's at this time of year in particular when so many folks converge in our community to enjoy our environment during this carnival season. So again, keep in mind the people and anything, the strategy as we develop it, it needs to touch on all the various desires, projects that have been talked about for some time now to restore our environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. And Madam Chair and task force members also noted that Parish President Billy Nungesser and Parish President Craig DeFaro from Blackman's Parish and St. Bernard Parish, respectively, are also here today. And those two parishes were absolutely on the leading edge of the oil spill and on the coastal challenges that we're experiencing in Louisiana. And certainly appreciate them being here and continuing to play a significant role in our coastal challenges in Louisiana and solutions. I'm going to try and do this quickly, and I'm going to talk too fast, so I apologize ahead of time. Coastal Louisiana is facing a crisis. This map was actually designed to show the perspective loss between 2000 and 2050. And that red area was the area that was much of it was lost as a result of the levees that were put on the river system and for the navigation channel, as John Barry noted. And the area in yellow is the potential land loss for the future, expected to be lost between 2000 and 2050. We virtually lost all of that already today. 2,300 square miles of land have been lost. Mr. Barry noted that if you could take the state of Delaware, and it would actually, that the loss we've had is greater than the size of that state. The state of Rhode Island is about equal to the size of the loss we've experienced here. To zoom in and let you know what that looks like up close. This is an area just southwest of where we are today in Terrebonne Parish, home of Louisiana. These are populated communities: Cocodrie, Dulac, Chauvin, Point Barry, Montague, all here in this area. Watch what happens over a 17-year period. 17 years. I'm going to say it again. People live here. Thousands of people live here. This is one of the hubs of our energy and our fishing communities in South Louisiana. 17 years. All those wetlands, that area gone. And so looking back 60 million years ago, you can see, and I think John tells me Missouri is where the Mississippi River Delta was 60 million years ago. Here's 25 million years ago. Look at that change between 60 million years ago and 25 million years ago. That river was doing a good job as a delta. And here we are today. And again, look at the loss. Look at how that's reversed. This isn't something that was unforeseen. Dating back into it was the late 1890s. This is a National Geographic magazine article that noted that the annual accretions of sanitary matters from the periodic overflows of the river are little more than actually maintain the loss. So recognizing this over 100 years ago of the challenges of maintaining this delta and how some of the anthropogenic or man-made changes that were occurring, like putting the levees in the river and disrupting the natural process that allowed land to actually accrete in South Louisiana, we're going to put our future in jeopardy. We've made a lot of changes in coastal Louisiana over the last few years, and some of the noteworthy ones I want to point out here. After Hurricane Katrina, the painful lessons learned, we consolidated our hurricane protection, flood control, coastal restoration, ecosystem restoration, sustainability efforts, and consolidated them all into a new agency in Louisiana, the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority, that is empowered with all of the authority needed to develop a sustainable, resilient coast of Louisiana. Just like the strategy that we're developing as a task force, the state of Louisiana went back in 2006, 2007, took all the plans that have been developed, and this is a small sample of the studies, plans, and reports that have been developed on coastal Louisiana. And we developed this plan on the left. The new master plan for coastal Louisiana with 4 objectives. How do we maintain, sustain, and allow for thriving communities? How do we sustain our unique culture in Louisiana, the Cajun culture that we have? How do we maintain the ecosystem services in Louisiana, as John noted, how productive they are? And how do we maintain an economy in Louisiana that is so based upon our coastal resources? And we're now taking that and updating it from 2007 to 2012. This 2007 master plan received national and international recognition from everything from development groups to environmental groups, again, to international planners. Amazing feat that the folks did back in 2006 and 2007, and we're now building upon it. We've developed a prioritization tool in South Louisiana, working with RAND and many, many other experts around the country to determine how we approach our $100 billion problem in South Louisiana. Where's the first bite? How do we prevent that scenario, that picture from the top right, that's what Louisiana is projected to look like in 2100 without action? Showing that basically Baton Rouge is on the coast. Basically that the home of over 1 million people and threatening over 2 million people. How do we prevent that from happening, and how do we make the best investments? A transparent process that holds us accountable to the objectives of projects. And you can see the 8 steps there. And I really think this is an incredibly innovative tool that's going to be used not just in Louisiana, but in many, many other coastal states and nations around the world. And our master plan outputs, this is what we're doing for our 2012 master plan. We're going to be able to show the levels of flood protection for different coastal communities, the levels of ecosystem services for our coastal communities, what the extent and character of landscape is in South Louisiana for the future. Being able to show the impacts of individual projects over the near term, and what kind of impacts future projects can have on coastal Louisiana, the schedules, the costs, and the funding sources for those. Today, we have over 250 projects that are in some form of development in South Louisiana. 250 projects. Here's 50 of them that we have under construction, and we'll have under construction in 2012, in fiscal year 2012. And you can see from the far west to the far east, and you make note that many of these projects are focused upon the river, trying to reestablish as best we can that natural process that Mother Nature did such a great job of building land and building the delta, building where we're standing today, and trying to mimic that, to reestablish the relationship between the adjacent wetlands and the river, the freshwater, the sediment. Some key areas of focus. Right now, with the hurricane protection system, we project somewhere between $250 and $600 billion in mitigation. Cumulatively, that's the largest allotment of restoration funds in Louisiana ever. Attempting to take those dollars and investing them on a more macro strategy instead of coming in and doing dozens of individual projects. Let's find ways to address restoration in Louisiana, to develop a more sustainable project, a more sustainable landscape using that massive funding stream. Clarity on future revenue streams. In the Gulf states here, represented on the task force. The Gulf of Mexico Energy Security Act. This is the revenue stream that shares a portion of revenues from oil, gas, and alternative energy sources in the offshore with the states that have hosted production for decades. I remind folks here that just from offshore energy production off Louisiana's coast alone, approximately $165 billion has been derived or has been generated in the United States Treasury. And in return, in fiscal year 2011, we're going to get $222,000 back on about $5 to $7 billion in revenue. But we're asking for clarity for these out-year funding streams to give us an idea of how much money is going to be coming in to the Gulf states so we can begin planning for our out-year project and construction schedules. Clarifying revenue streams from the oil spill, the Clean Water Act. We could be talking about a revenue stream of $5 billion, we could be talking about $22 billion in fines attributable to this spill, dependent upon gross negligence. What about the impacts of natural gas? Is that going to up the fines or is it not? Dispersants, is that going to up the fines or is it not? Getting clarity on these revenue streams is going to be very important for our ability on the Gulf Coast to project the future for our constituents, to project the future for the ecosystem, for the communities, for the economy. And of course, the natural resource damage assessment process, the process by which the responsible parties are required to make whole the impacts of the natural resources, to take remedial actions for the impacts of the birds, the fish, the air, the water, and the human use losses. Can we take emergency restoration actions? Emergency restoration actions haven't taken place yet. It's 10 months after the oil spill, they haven't taken place. Early restoration, developing a strategy or some type of agreement where early restoration can occur, where the responsible parties will make a down payment on their natural resource liabilities. And another idea. Some folks here are familiar with mitigation banks for impacting wetlands. Can we do the same thing for NERA, for the natural resource damage assessment process? Can we actually carry out projects today and bank the credits associated with those projects and then sell them to the responsible parties in the future? The second task, free the restoration program from others' liability. So first, let's do no harm. And some examples. There are 10 major federal navigation channels in South Louisiana. The operations and maintenance of these channels is 100% federal, as John noted, the incredible reliance upon Louisiana's navigation channels for maritime commerce. Hundreds of billions of dollars in commerce per year, 20% of the nation's maritime commerce relies upon these navigation channels. These channels also serve as a conduit for saltwater intrusion for storm surge. The banks of some of these channels have eroded from a few hundred feet to a few miles wide, serving as a larger conduit for saltwater intrusion, a larger conduit for storm surge, and exacerbating the loss of coastal Louisiana. Our coastal program in Louisiana is being saddled with these responsibilities. And two examples for the QIPA program, otherwise known as GROW Act, that about $45 million in the last few years has gone toward addressing this responsibility of the navigation program. On the Mississippi River Gulf outlet, it's expected to cost $3 billion just to restore a portion of that ecosystem impacted by navigation channels. Fulfilling environmental requirements, again, these levees on the river to maintain the certainty of the navigation channel. We went from the accretion of land in South Louisiana, a growing delta of 3/4 square mile per year, to a loss on average of 28 square miles per year as a result of that project. Can you imagine somebody trying to come in and doing an EIS today on a project, a federal action that would cause a loss of 28 square miles of jurisdictional wetlands per year. That wouldn't go over so well. Clearing implementation hurdles. This schematic right here is, this is actually the process by which water resource projects in the United States are developed and pursued. And my favorite thing about this is you can actually go in a circle. And today, and I have, today this process on average takes about 40 years. And a lot of people like to beat up on the Corps, including me. But I want to say that this is more than just the Corps of Engineers. There needs to be fundamental reform to this process, and Congress needs to step up and be involved in this reform. Coastal Louisiana is a perfect example of how this process doesn't work. And a few suggestions. This continued reliance upon an annual funding stream, where we get to know a few months ahead of time how much money we're going to have for that year. It's impossible to plan. And the Corps of Engineers, I know, has their hands tied on this. I don't know how you mobilize and demobilize equipment and know how to schedule your project implementation. You have no idea how much funding is coming for the future. Ready to meet the alternative arrangements. We did it for the New Orleans Hurricane Protection System, and it's been a huge success down here, allowing us to move quickly. And looking at alternative project delivery mechanisms, again, like the QUIPRA or the BROAC process that involves the state and all of the relevant federal resource agencies. One of my last slides here. Saving the coast is doable. Developing a resilient, a productive ecosystem on the Gulf Coast and coastal Louisiana is doable. This was actually an accident. This is just over to the west of where we are today. The Wax Lake Outlet and the Atchafalaya Delta, one of the main, distributaries of the Mississippi River. All that land was built. All that delta was built on the left of the Wax Lake since 1980, and on the right side of the Atchafalaya since 1973. And this was an accident. Just think if we do it on purpose. So, I'm going to sum up here, and I know we're probably over time, but really want to reiterate to the task force about the national implications here. Hurricane Katrina, just using it as an example. Hurricane Katrina so far has cost taxpayers $150 billion. Hurricane Katrina shut down the nation's maritime, the nation's commerce superhighway for 5 days. After Hurricane Katrina, gasoline prices spiked nationwide 75 cents a gallon. After Hurricanes Gustav and Ike in 2008, gasoline prices spiked $1.40 a gallon. The highest price spike since the Arab oil embargo. Every consumer in the nation, all 50 states paid for it. As a result of that hurricane and the hurricanes again in 2008, we've had an increased reliance upon foreign imports. Seafood and energy are two of them. And when we need additional energy in the United States, because we're not producing enough oil, gas, or alternative energy streams here, some of the countries that we turn to, some of the top 5 countries we turn to provide us with additional energy include Nigeria and Venezuela. Countries that don't share America's values and countries that don't respect the environment as we do in the United States. It's important to keep that in mind. And the nationwide economic and debt repercussions are extraordinary, going back to the top bullet, $150 billion. So in closing, Madam Chair and members of the task force, the reasons for every agency here, the reasons for every person in this room to want to develop a sustainable coast on the Gulf Coast and on the coast of Louisiana. If you like to fish, we have the most productive fisheries in coastal Louisiana. We're the 4th top recreational fishing destination in the nation. People come here and think they're good fishermen. It's actually just easy. We have tons of fish. Commercial fishing, John hit. We're the top producer of domestic, wild, organic seafood in the continental United States. Top producer of shrimp, oysters, blue crabs, crawfish right here in Louisiana. If you're concerned about the debt, and again, point to that top bullet, that was one disaster. $150 billion that we're all paying for, all 50 states are paying for, our children are paying for, and our grandchildren are paying for. We have 2 options. on the debt side. We can make proactive investments on the Gulf Coast to make it more resilient, or we will wait for the next hurricane and we can pay exponentially more of it. On the energy side, the statistics there in the third bullet, every consumer in the nation, and think about those repercussions. Every widget made anywhere in the United States, they're paying more to do it because it costs more for their energy. To heat, to cool, to power their machinery, to transport it, everybody pays it. On the trade side, the river system here, I'd love to say that we just have great governance in Louisiana. Some people would say that's not the case historically. But we actually have this pretty incredible asset here. That's the Mississippi River. Being able to have maritime access to 30 states. Mr. Barry noted the port in Huntington, West Virginia is the 8th highest volume port in the nation. How incredible is that? It's because of our river. So you want to decrease the trade deficit. There's no question as a result of labor and environmental costs in the United States, it's a little bit more to do business here. But because of the efficiency of that maritime, that commerce superhighway, we can compete. We can compete with other countries because it's so efficient for us to get our projects to market, not just in the United States, but around the world. And that river, the future of that river, the sustainability of our navigation system in the top 5 ports in the country are dependent upon our success in developing a sustainable coast and sustainable ecosystem in Louisiana. You're an environmentalist. You're an agency, a natural resource agency. Talk about the wetlands. 2,300 square miles of wetlands have been lost. We have a 404 wetlands program to govern wetlands to prevent their loss. These aren't just any wetlands. These are wetlands that the United States Fish and Wildlife Service calls the most productive ecosystem on the continent, right here in South Louisiana. Mr. Barry noted that 90% of the species in the Gulf of Mexico are dependent upon our Gulf Coast and the services that our wetlands provide to the Gulf. Maybe you're concerned about climate change. The greenhouse gases that have been released as a result of that 2,300 square miles of land loss has released the equivalent of 80 million vehicles driving per year. 80 million vehicles. So the more we lose, the greater emissions that occur. Maybe you're a historic preservationist. That's a term. We have one of the highest concentrations of historical structures right here in New Orleans of anywhere in the nation. An incredible diversity in our history. From the Spanish to the French. The city is amazing. And of course, other areas of South Louisiana and the Gulf Coast are similar. Maybe you like to drink. Mardi Gras, maybe you like music. Jazz Fest. Another reason to save this great city. Maybe we want to be a world leader in technology and innovation. What's happening right now in South Louisiana, the relative sea level rise and the challenges we're experiencing are projected to be experienced by all the Gulf states and by every coastal nation in the world. The sea level rise. So we actually have a laboratory here, real world examples, and an opportunity to get it right. The policy solutions, the engineering solutions, the science solutions, the legal solutions, to get it right here. And the repercussions, again, extraordinary if we don't. Social justice. In Louisiana, it doesn't matter the income level, it doesn't matter the education. People on our coast know about our coast. They understand our coast. There are opportunities here as we develop these solutions.
You will understand 2 things. One, quite well, what this task force is about, how we intend to do our work. We have a very ambitious agenda. We have a final report due in October. But final reports mean public input has been taken not only generically but on draft reports. And so you'll see that this morning in our presentations. But we also want to make sure that especially stakeholders understand the process for stakeholder input. Remember the President's executive order that established the task force you see before you said that this should be from the ground up, from the region, not from officials, especially federal officials, but any of us telling the region what the strategy would be for restoring the coast. The ultimate purpose of this meeting, then, is twofold. I want to remind everyone this is a meeting of the task force. This group doesn't get together in person very often. We do meet by telephone and teleconference. We have chosen to have the entire meeting open to the public. You can see our deliberations, but much of the morning until about 1 o'clock will be the deliberations of this task force itself. At 1 o'clock we'll begin the stakeholder input process, and we'll go into the evening because we realize that many stakeholders are at work or will be able to join us later in the day. I just wanted to be clear on that because you may feel like this group is talking to itself a lot, but we wanted to conduct our business in an open and transparent manner, and we welcome you. We'll be having meetings like this throughout this region. This is an all-hands-on-deck effort. Anyone and everyone who has an interest and cares about this task force, that's what this task force is meant to facilitate. You've all heard me talk a long time that this region is long overdue for the kind of federal and national attention that the federal government first produced 1.3 billion pounds of commercial fish and shellfish annually. There is a $367 million at dockside from shrimp, 73% of total U.S. shrimp production, $60 million in oysters, or 59% of U.S. total production. The region is also home to a $29 billion per year agriculture industry. There is also $124 billion from oil and gas exploration and recovery, which provides another 55,000 jobs. And 7 of the top 10 busiest ports in our country are along the Gulf Coast. 65% of the nation's maritime trade passes through these Gulf ports. In fact, if you added up the output from Gulf trading, it would make up the 6th largest economy in the world. As has been so correctly noted so often, this is a working coast. It's a working coast that's critical to the nation. When the Gulf was thriving, the economies of the 5 Gulf states supported more than 19 million jobs and nearly $2.5 trillion of the U.S. GDP. That was in 2008. 36% of the region's employment is in coastal communities, with an even greater percentage in some states like Louisiana, where 80% of the jobs are reported along the coast. What these numbers really represent is a way of life and a culture that depends on a healthy, vibrant, and economically strong Gulf community. Someone said yesterday at our pre-meeting that when you think about every one of those industries, they're not just done in conjunction with the natural resources. They depend on the natural resources for their very survival. We've seen in recent years what happens to the way of life here when it's threatened. The hurricanes of 2005 and 2006 showed how our full speed ahead on our restoration efforts here in the Gulf Coast region. I'm thrilled to be back in my hometown. I will admit, come in a day early, under the radar. It just had me a little bit of Mardi Gras. It was necessary and restorative in all the ways that hometowns can be. So it's great to be here. We're going to hear from many of the people here on the dais, but what you see before you are the members of the Gulf Coast Ecosystem Restoration Task Force, and you'll note that we have representatives from the 5 states that make up this great region, as well as what I called this morning on the news an alphabet soup of federal agencies. But please understand, from the White House to the Department of Justice to the resource agencies like NOAA and U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Department of Interior, Agriculture, Transportation, here to focus the efforts of governments on restoring the Gulf Coast, its ecosystem, and its habitat, its people. We also have, I know, a number of elected officials in the audience. I saw Parish President Farce, Parish President Charlotte Randolph. I know I saw them come in. Welcome and greetings. And if there are others in the audience, welcome and greetings to you as well. I see conservation groups, environmental justice advocates. I see people who care about the industries of this region, and I see environmentalists as well. So welcome everyone. This is a day that many have hoped for and worked quite significantly towards. This task force is your task force, and I hope that when you leave today, In the past half-century, nutrient buildups along the coast have led to increased dissolved oxygen levels, also dangerous to marine life. The area in the northern Gulf of Mexico, the Louisiana and Texas continental shelf, is the largest hypoxic zone, the largest dead zone in the United States, and the second largest for the world's coastal ocean. We thought meeting here in Louisiana, we would start by focusing on the Louisiana challenges, because we will have meetings in each of the other states. So you'll see a presentation now on at least a little bit of what we're facing here along the Louisiana Gulf Coast and in this area. All of our resources are essential to the millions of people who live in this state and in the area. The Gulf Coast is an extraordinary uniter of 5 states that share a single coastline, and a constant reminder that what happens in one part of the Gulf often affects every other part of the Gulf. In the years ahead, the population here is projected to continue to grow. The coastal population of the 5 states of the Gulf of Mexico is projected by the Census Bureau to increase by nearly 40% between now and 2025. The natural beauty here also explains why every year millions more people come to visit the Gulf Coast. They come to vacation, to sail, to swim, to fish, and to enjoy these great waters. In 2008, national and international tourists spent about $145 billion in the 5 coastal states. That economic activity and travel and tourism employed about 1.7 million people. And of course, tourism is just one of the many incredible economic drivers provided by these waters. What can bring, and that the combined resources of federal, state, local government, and the public can mean in aligning resources and getting things done. So with that, I just thought we would start for just a minute and remember what it is that we're here for. We'll hear from, by the way, our newly designated Vice Chair, Mr. Garrett Graves, who is Chair of the Coastal Protection and Resource Authority of Louisiana, in just a minute, but I want to take just a second to welcome him to the Vice Chairmanship. All right, the Gulf of Mexico, one of America's greatest and most diverse treasures. We all know it's home to some of the most extraordinary habitats and wildlife, wetlands, migratory birds, deep sea and shallow water aquatic life. And we also know that those many natural resources are under threat and have been since well before the BP spill. The area holds 30% of the nation's coastal marsh, about 3 million acres. Those 3 million acres are critical habitat for millions of birds. Louisiana's wetlands alone provide wintering ground for 70% of the nation's migratory waterfowl. We also have here about 90% of the continental U.S. coastal marsh loss. Yet every 38 minutes, a football field-sized parcel of land turns to open water. This land makes our communities, infrastructure, our ports, our other resources vulnerable, and this destruction is further unbalancing our ecosystem, taking away critical nurseries and habitats. Louisiana has lost an average of 34 miles of land per year for the last half-century. The region is also averaging estuarine emergent loss of more than 5,500 acres a year. Now, at the same time, we are losing the necessary resources to filter pollution and maintain the balance of the ecosystem. We are seeing rapid increases in nutrient pollution.